Our hangout is now live. So welcome, people. Usually I cut this part out
That's
where where we're just like trying to figure out how to find the page because it's not easy, and that's YouTube for you.
Yeah, there's definitely some improvements they could make, but yeah, every live stream I start with is I think we're live. That's how
Exactly.
every single one starts. Yeah.
Yeah. But for those of you who may be watching this at some time in the future, my name's Jason, sometimes known as the JTL. This is the Painfully Honest Tech Podcast. We have with us today our guest. Now, this is the first question is like Tailosive Tech, is that how you prefer to be known on YouTube, or is it like an entity that you are part of? Like, do you prefer Drew or
my real name's Andrew Erickson, for all those who don't know, but I go on YouTube as Tailosive Tech. And yeah, whenever I'm doing that part of YouTube, whenever I'm having tech discussions, you can refer to me that way. I'll honestly answer as either.
Right.
It's up to you.
Yeah, it's always tough to know what's the boundary. Like, my channel was called the JTL before it was called Painfully Honest Tech, and I had started my YouTube channel years before, and just to have an account, and I just called it that, and it was a nickname that people had used for a brief period of time. And then suddenly, like, people started watching the videos, and I started thinking, like, from a marketing standpoint,
yeah,
the JTL doesn't say anything about what I actually do.
That's true. Yeah, I always hate about thinking about those things after you've already started. I picked Tailosive as the name because when I first started YouTube, I was so young, and I was worried that you're not supposed to put your name on the internet. That's dangerous. So that's when I started coming up with all those aliases and stuff. But yeah.
So you have I think I counted, including Tailosive Tech, 8 channels total.
Oh, I think I've even lost count at this point. Well, the idea with all the different channels is just like my idea was whatever opinion or whatever video I wanted to make, I would have somewhere to put it, because my issue was there were so many YouTube channels I liked one part of, but I didn't want all of the other crap they talked about. I just wanted their opinions on, I just wanted this guy to review this movie. I didn't want 8 other people talking about something else in my subscriptions feed. So when I did Tailosive, I was like, if you want tech, there's tech. If you want gaming, there's gaming. And just keep it all more separate. You can subscribe to all if you want, but if you just want one, that's fine too. So that's why I've created so many, and why so many have been neglected. Is because most of them don't bring in that much.
I always thought that you were just thinking well ahead about your media empire.
Yeah, that's part of it too. My goal never stops, as in I want to get as big as possible. I don't care how big that is, but there's always something bigger I have planned next. As in, there's always some bigger project I could do if I had a bigger budget. If there was something more I could invest in, or if there was something more I could start working on, there's always a bigger project. I kind of don't settle. So that's
good. That's good. I mean, it's you're in a position from the get-go that's much better than where I was, where it's like all of a sudden this just accidentally is a thing, and I have to retrofit. And I mean, once I did change the name, that was the hardest thing to decide to do. But
really, yeah.
Then it was like, because at that time, like I said, I had around 2,000 subscribers, and I was growing steadily but slowly.
Sure.
When I changed the name to Painfully Honest Tech, that's when it started moving a little more quickly.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, and to me, that's like, I lived in New York City for a long time, and I worked in like marketing and advertising as a creative in a lot of different ways. So I kind of got to know that world, and so I just was thinking, like, well, from a marketing standpoint, you have to be indicative of what you're selling.
Right. Yeah, you have to be a brand. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. You are in California now. And when did you move down to California?
Oh, I'm born and raised here.
Oh,
actually. Yeah, I was born here in Chico, And yeah, I haven't gone very far, to be honest, in terms of geographic locate. I think I've left the country once, and I visited Florida last year. But other than that, I've kind of been stuck in California most of my life between school and work, and yeah, I haven't seen much of the world, sadly. I'm hoping to change that though.
Yeah, to be stuck in California is not the worst thing that could happen, I suppose. It's
maybe Butte County, but yeah, not California. There's very bad parts of town that I since I've been here for a long time, I kind of know where everything is. I don't know street names, but I know where everything is.
right.
And there's definitely been some sketchy. I can't recommend anyone to move here, but it's where I'm born and raised, and I have the biggest community of people I know. So, and the rent is very cheap, but
Yeah.
but it's because of the sketchiness of the area. But
No, I get it.
apart from that, yeah, it's just it's home, which is where you were raised. So
Yeah, I grew up in West Virginia, so
Mm.
you know,
do you
it's
miss
the
it?
well, I do, but there's people from West Virginia have a really strange relationship with
Mm.
being from West Virginia because it's sort of always like, you know, an underdog, second thought, kind of like not
Sure,
really
sure.
all that recognized for anything.
Mm.
And you just get that mentality kind of ingrained in you. And
Mhm.
there's always a tie to it. Like I just got done before I got on here watching a West Virginia basketball game.
Yeah,
So-
yeah.
and that's the way I stay connected to home, other than talking to my mom on the phone. But yeah, it's not a very prosperous place. It's like the 49th poorest, fattest, oldest.
Yeah, we got a couple of those back in Oroville.
Yeah.
Not being known for much. I think our football team back in Oroville lost one of our games 75-0, which is kind of a record.
Nice.
That's one of our records. But I wasn't into any sports. I had to film the football team and make them look good. That was my job, and I did a pretty good job.
Okay. So
Yeah.
where did the YouTube thing come in? Like at what stage did you start doing YouTube and sort of building up to where you are at this point?
So I discovered YouTube when I was a very, very young kid. So with those annoying 8-year-olds in the comments section, that was me at one point.
Mhm.
I full well remembering me making tons of comments that were not that people did not like, and I wish I could delete those, but I don't even have access to that account anymore. But I first started watching little cartoons like Ed's World is the first one I come to think of, was this just cartoon show, and then I was watching Laser Collection, just random, kid humor, potty mouth humor kind of stuff. And I just liked the idea that from the beginning, one person can be in control of an entire channel.
Right.
Because other than YouTube, I didn't really see that anywhere. I didn't see someone deciding that, I want to talk about this, and I don't need a producer. I don't need a studio. I don't need a crew. I can just make what I want to make. And there's some people that are good enough at this that they can get paid for it. That was just mind-boggling to me. And originally, I wanted to go to film school in LA, but my sister went to film school, where she met her husband, and my friends went to film school, the ones that were older than me. I've always kind of acted older than I really am, and I actually never really associated with people my age. I think as long as I've been around. So there were lots of friends I had that were 2-3 years older than me, and they all went to film school. And when they came back, they started telling me all these things they've learned and all of the formats they have to get used to and all of the film lingo that I didn't know that they did because they went to film school. And I kind of developed this is film school really where I want to be? Because I was never really into school growing up, as I couldn't find applications for everything I was being taught, and I couldn't wrap my mind around it. But I always had YouTube on the side, so I started making, like I said, like little pencil animations back when I was 10 or 12 years old, and that developed into filming stuff with a camera, which was more like action stuff. I wanted to make action movies. Found out quickly I wasn't good at it, and people didn't care about that. So then I started making comedy because I was like, hey, maybe that's something people want to watch. So comedy started, but not as good still. That not that many people were interested because I branded myself with this weird name that no one knew. Because I was like, well, no matter how good my content is, no one is looking up the word Tailosive. So maybe I should start making content that people are actually looking for. So that's when I got the idea to do the network, which was tech channel, gaming channel, movie reviews, everything you can imagine. I thought of that because I was like, well, no one's searching for Tailosive Saturday Short coming out once a week. Even though I was putting all my time into that, I knew that maybe iPhone unboxing video would be a bit more searched. And good thing I was right about that. So it worked out. So as soon as but it was not immediate. I was making tech videos for about 2 years before anyone watched them. There was many videos that were uploaded in public for months with the view count of 0. Just no one cared. No one watched them. But I think they started picking up when I started being a bit more aggressive about it and being like, oh, that's a topic people are talking about right now. I'm going to talk about that. And that's when you start getting the clicks, and snowballed from there for the most part.
Right. Yeah. I think I remember you saying in a video that I watched that, you know, you kind of had more of a general tech channel and that's what you were doing. But when you started really focusing on the Apple stuff is when everything started to take off. So
yes, the channel did not skyrocket or shoot up when I was unbiased, which is what I tried to do for a while. I had been an Apple user all my life, and then I was like, oh, I think I'm going to get this gaming PC because it's a lot cheaper and I can get a lot of specs out of it. So I'll use that for video editing now. So then I could start a tech channel and be like, hey, I have PC and Mac. They both have pros and cons. This is just whatever you want, you know, just pick the side you prefer. And then when I started doing the more, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to be as biased as possible and not try to hide it. That's when people, more or less haters started finding me. People who didn't agree with me started showing up and disliking. But the important thing is they were watching. Yeah. So, and that got views, which brought in the fans and people who agreed with me. So it just kind of was a merging of people who didn't like me and did like me all kind of happened at once. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember with me, it was kind of like, I'd always heard about this thing called the YouTube algorithm, but yeah, I'd never seen it in action, you know, for a long time. But, but yeah, it's, I just decided like, I never wanted to be unbiased because I just figure like everybody's got a bias. So
yeah.
And
I agree.
I just wanted to like, I didn't want to be like one of the tech channels that might like sort of tiptoe around a couple of negative points about something and, you know, not try and tick anybody off. And so I just tried to be as honest and painful as I could.
That's what I like about your name. It's very blunt and to the point.
Yeah, but
I like that.
It brings in some loaded expectations, let's say.
Sure. If people are expecting you to hit things hard and probably be a bit more ranty than you'd like to be, I bet.
From time to time. The one thing that's fascinating to me about covering Apple content is that you win both ways.
Really? What do you mean by that?
Well, you get people who love Apple stuff, so they'll watch anything that's Apple, and if you're entertaining and that kind of thing, they'll come back. And then you have people who hate Apple, and so it makes them so mad they'll watch anything.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's a good point. I've been thinking about that recently. Like, I don't think if I was a Samsung sheep or if I was a Google sheep, I would have had the same success story.
Yeah,
as in it probably wouldn't have been as defensive, or people wouldn't have been as passionate about it.
Yeah, I think I don't know if you've read this book, but I listen to a lot of audiobooks that I wouldn't otherwise read, and one of them that I've got in my queue right now is Primal Branding, which is sort of the 7 steps to the 7 aspects that you have to have inherent in your brand to be able to build that kind of passionate following.
Sure.
Apple has certainly done it. Starbucks coffee is an example. They give a lot, that kind of thing. Whereas Google's approach, and Microsoft as well, in like the previous century, they were more about being a platform as opposed
Right.
to,
Yeah.
and so I think that's why you're probably right that if you were, a Samsung guy, then you would be limited to a certain extent.
And yeah, and people would, I think, be as passionate, or like you said, with Apple, no matter what your opinion is, you get clicks either way. You get people who are for you, against you, but either way, people are watching and people are engaged in that discussion. Whereas I think, S9 coming out, it's nowhere near as popular as iPhone 10 release or iPhone 10 leaks and stuff like that. They're just night and day different kinds of excitement.
Right. I think it's, one thing that happened for Samsung, and one thing that I think maybe changed the way that tech was. We were talking about this a little bit before we came on live. Like when the Note 7 started to explode.
Yeah.
I think people's it became a much more in-depth kind of situation where people like wanted to know what happened and why it happened. And so you get channels like Jerry Rig Everything, and you see a lot of those kind of, I guess I don't want to call Jerry Rig Everything like a specialty channel, but
no, I know what you mean. It's kind of a, I don't know a lot of channels like that, to be fair, that he kind of find his own unique audience in that regard.
Yeah. And I want to say to everybody that's out in the chat right now, Drew and I are just kind of doing our sort of interview thing right now, but we're going to throw it open to questions as the time goes on. So we're not ignoring you. Hello, Christian, Madbird, all those people. We are saying hello to you, but I want to cover a few things before we like get deep into the stuff.
Sure. That's smart.
But in an effort to move toward the stuff, where did Apple sort of come into the equation for you? Like what was your Apple experience that kind of was the starting point?
It's kind of depressing and sad to say, but it kind of runs in the family. My father was the big Apple guy before I was even born. Right. He all the old Macs I have in the background of my videos, those are all his. Those were all the family computers. But for a long time growing up, just in the house, that was all we had. So that's kind of all I knew as a computer was the Mac. That's all I knew. And then eventually I started going over to friends' houses and finding out that there was different versions of computers. And I remember discovering that and being like, "Hey, Mom and Dad, these are cheaper. Can't we go this route?" Like, just basic mindset. It's just like, right. I want a computer that's cheaper. Can we go the PC route? And from a very young age, they're always like, "Well, Drew, we use PCs." That my parents are both teachers, and they were like, "Well, Drew, we use PCs, and we don't like them, and they die faster, and they're not good for these things. So we're not a PC family, basically." almost like a religion in a way, but not that hardcore. As in, like when I got into later in elementary school and middle school, they wouldn't care if I wanted to buy a PC. I didn't, but they weren't that exclusive. But right. So as long as I've been growing up, there's always been Apple products around. So first it was an iMac, very similar to the one behind yours, the first iMac. Yeah. That was what we kind of grew up with. And I don't have one in my background because my dad actually still uses his at his school. Nice. They still work. And
yeah, this one still works as well. I just don't know what to do with OS 9.
Yeah, exactly. That was before 10. That computer's as old as I am, which is kind of an interesting way of looking at it.
I got it for $10 at the local, charity.
Oh, sweet.
Garage sale thing. So, and it had all the accessories and everything. So,
oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
I would have taken that too. Yeah. So, growing up, also the other thing I could think of was we had a family iPod, just kind of the first generation one before it was like a trackpad. So then mom or dad would upgrade to an iPod Nano, and it would look a little better. And I would always be asking for it. Growing up, I was just like, "Can I use that?" I liked the 3 games it had on it, or the fact that it was just a touchscreen with a click wheel. And for the longest time, I didn't even know how to use them. I would just swipe around on them until they would work. But then eventually, all my life I've been a worker, no matter if I'm going to school or on vacation, I always found ways of generating income just because that's what my family kind of taught me to do. And that's just kind of how they raised me. And I always knew there was something else I was saving for. So
Right.
all through school, all through middle school, I was like, oh, if I had that, I could make this. If I had that, I could do this. So I always knew I needed money, so I better find a way to get money. And so for the longest time, I just mowed lawns, and I would just mow lawns for days and days and days and weekends and weekends. And it was before I could drive. My dad would drive me to the places that I would offer, like, can I mow your lawn here? Can I mow your lawn here? And they'd say, sure, just because I think they liked seeing a young kid trying to be an entrepreneur. So there were lots of places around Oroville that definitely needed lawn mowing. And both my grandmas and my uncle own lots of real estate. They rent out places. So there were plenty of places I could go to and pick up lawn jobs. So as long as I had money coming in, I was saving for something else. So my first product was an iPod Nano. That was kind of the first one I bought myself. And then when I graduated, I think it might have been middle school. No, it was elementary school. When I graduated 6th grade, I bought my first iMac, which was a 2011, back when they had the CD drive. And my iMac Pro doesn't look too different from it today even. And it still works. It's still in the back and it's plugged in, and we use it for live streaming stuff. But so yeah, I guess it all started just because that's all really I knew. And after that iMac, about a year after, I bought my first PC, and that PC experience is why I stayed an Apple sheep, I think, is because I realized that I couldn't get, I could use a PC and I could learn how to use it, and I got better at using it, but I didn't enjoy it. I felt like I was fighting the computer opposed to just having it work with me, which is what I've always found with Apple products. So I guess I just stay with what I know. And then when I started experimenting with other brands, like I've owned more Android phones than iPhones still to this day. And
there are more of them.
Yeah, there are a lot more. I think there's a lot more that come out. So yeah, I bought mostly Androids, and I haven't found one that makes me want to switch yet. So until that day, I stay an Apple sheep.
Yeah, I mean, I think people, it depends on what video I've made, but people think that I either hate or love Apple. But my experience is somewhat similar, although, like, obviously my first computer that I had available to me in a place that I lived was a Macintosh Classic 2.
Nice.
Tiny little screen. Yeah. And it was my then girlfriend, now wife. She got it from her parents. They bought it for like $3,000 or something.
Yeah.
Has 64 gigabytes of memory. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah. They weren't cheap either. A lot of people forget that.
Not gigabytes, megabytes.
Right. Megabytes. That was a lot too. My dad told me about that. Yeah.
But I used that to, when I moved to New York, correspond, and it was just kind of like when I was in college, it was kind of the transition period between, like, I had a college email account, but I never used it, kind of thing. And then as I got into the workforce, like I've always been a music guy, and for a long time, Apple was really the only company that reliably serviced creative professionals.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And it took a long time for PCs to kind of catch up, and for Adobe stuff to be available, and for audio recording, digital audio workstations to be available for the PC. So I just, I learned to do graphic design on a Mac. I learned to record on a Mac. And I think I've always had the same kind of experience as you, where, like, I can get a workflow going on a PC and have no problems whatsoever, and it's totally fine. And I have a gaming PC, and I feel like I can now be somewhat agnostic to it. But I always seem to revert back to the Apple for ease of use and workflow and all that kind of stuff. So, like, that's what I have at my office. I work at the university. Everyone else in our office has has PCs, and I was like,
Okay, yeah.
and I was like,
So it helps to know both.
yeah. But I had at a certain point we were doing a podcast and we needed to record stuff, and that was probably like 2010ish, and PC really just hadn't caught up and gotten critical mass on that front. So I was like, we have to have Macs in my department, and
Right.
we still use that 2010 i3 iMac as the recording PC for the podcast.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
That's cool. Yeah, they're reliable.
yeah. We had to like take out the original hard drive and put in an SSD.
Sure, yeah, that speeds them up.
Yeah,
real quick.
Yeah, but it's been I've used Apple more often than not, and I think although I've owned a lot of Android phones,
yeah,
they tend to either lose interest in them, like not wanting to do the work to make them as cool as they could be.
Yeah,
or
I know what you mean. Yeah,
or sometimes it's a dual edge. It's a double-edged sword. Like you get the ecosystem that forces you to do this thing this way, but once you do that thing that way, it can also be really easy, and you don't have to think about it.
You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
No, I know what you mean. I've experienced that with every Android phone. I'm always like, the first week I get it, I'm always really into it. I'm like, oh, this is great. Oh, I love the design. Oh, I love these features. And then a couple of weeks go by and you're just kind of like, well, I have all these options, but are they good options? Am I enjoying all these options, or do we all kind of fall back into using our phone for the same things anyway? And then whichever company is able to produce that reliability is the one that wins in the end. I guess, yeah, a lot of that depends on personal preference, but in my experience, the one that's not necessarily has all the options, but because it has that optimization, it has that reliability. And then, of course, Apple with their iOS updates can help refresh the look and the feel of your phone pretty consistently over the years.
Right. Yeah. And the one thing that I like about Android, but I haven't been able to take advantage of in my usage of Android phones, is like with the Note 8. I think I've owned every Note phone but the 5.
Oh, really?
I love what it is. I'm a writer. I love the idea of having a pen and having all that power to be able to do that stuff. But I find like with the Note 8, I bought the Note 8 twice because I just was like, it has to be the right phone for me because of all these features. The reason I took it back was because I have to use an Exchange email account at my work, which is also tied to the hospital. So it has to be super secure.
Sure. Okay.
And so when I couldn't use Face ID for the Note 8. I couldn't use a pattern lock. I had to use fingerprint or a pin.
Right.
And I swear to God, I could not get that freaking fingerprint thing to work.
Yeah.
And I would just be like hitting it 5 times in all kinds of different ways. And then it would say, you have to wait 30 seconds now. And I would just put in the pin. I'm like, it just took me 15 seconds to get into my phone. Like, this is ridiculous.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But I tried to persevere. And then I even went back for a second helping, and it just really bothered me. And that's what usually happens with me in those types of things. Like, okay, so people are now in the chat, they're throwing out topics for us to discuss.
Like I only see headphone jack, but
I see headphone jack and ports.
Is that something we disagree on, or is that safe to say? Or
headphone jack? Yeah, I think we do disagree on the headphone jack.
Okay. What's your stance on that?
Well, I mean, it's partially because I'm old school about what I like about audio, and I feel like there's not a prevalent solution to get the same kind of audio quality that you can from wired headphones, and the same kind of reliability that you can get from wired headphones in the Bluetooth world at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. And I like headphones a lot.
Yeah, you being an audio guy, I'm sure you use lots of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think ultimately for me that like the things that I come to question are like, okay, so Apple needed to do the courageous thing and remove the headphone jack, but
Mm-hmm.
there's still a headphone jack on nearly every other product they release.
Yeah, and I actually don't like that about Apple. I wish they'd kind of be more consistent about it. But I commonly get the counter argument of, like audio engineers needing no latency between headphones and computers, so wireless can't work for them. But that's usually the protection that people give when they talk about there being a headphone jack on MacBooks or on the iMac or on desktops. I don't get why it's on the iPad, but on desktops they keep it around because audio professionals need it and stuff like that. But of the many audio, and I'm sure this is different from person to person, but many of the audio engineers I've worked with and also just talked to in the comments have also mentioned that they use audio mixers, and I know a lot of musicians out there as well that plug all their stuff in via 1/4-inch jack instead of 3.5 millimeter, meaning that
Right.
I'm not saying like all audio professionals are ready to switch to wireless, because that's obviously not true, but is the headphone jack really the sole key to all of that? Or is there certain audio professionals using USB? Some of them plug in via HDMI. I've even talked to others are adapting to Thunderbolt 3,
Right.
which can transfer more data, more power, and actually get a better connection through that than typical headphone jack. But I'm not really sure how you use it on a day-to-day.
Well, I think there's a little bit of a difference in the computer aspect of it, where it's not just for consumption, like it's a utility port,
Right.
that has a bunch of different uses that a bunch of different people and a bunch of different use cases could have. So it does make sense that it's still there on the computers and on the MacBooks and that kind of thing. I think though that something like the iPad, there's actually a super huge community of people who do all of their recording on iPads.
Right.
And I think it's just one of those things where you can plug the headphone jack in and monitor your audio while and get a much better experience out of that as you're creating than but you can also do that by plugging into a USB to Lightning thing and using a USB interface.
Sure. Yeah. Lightning's still there.
Yeah. So I think part of it for me is just that, like you said, the AirPods actually do a fantastic job, I found in my experience, of letting you watch, say, a YouTube video or something on your computer with them and have it be synced so that there's not a delay on the sound versus the picture. But
sure.
a lot of even really high-end wireless headphones don't do that.
Really?
It's like I have several pairs that I can't wear and watch YouTube videos.
Oh, really? They're just too delayed there.
Yeah.
Well, I could say right now that even though you're a live feed, the AirPods can't predict what you're going to say. Your lip movements and audio sync up perfectly for me. Which is just kind of cool because I'm talking on my iMac right now. So, and I just kind of see that as potential because I'm not an audio editor, but I edit my videos with these and it works fine.
Yeah.
But I guess that's why I'd bring up, Apple might be more in your boat then because they're keeping it on the iPad, but not the phone. Like, do you use your phone to monitor audio stuff you're recording on there, or?
Well, the one place that I do is so I'm using a Canon camera right now, and Canon camera mic preamps are awful, and all this hiss, and you can try and do all kinds of voodoo to make the hiss not so bad, but it's still there.
Yeah.
So I've done some testing with making videos where I plug a lavalier mic or something else into my phone and then just use that as my remote recorder. Of course, I could spend $75 and get a Zoom H1, but my phone is in my pocket.
Sure.
And I've done that with the LG V20, and it worked really well. In fact, it had like limiters and all this other stuff on it. I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna play with these, and then the sound came out like shit. But it's
right.
but that's something that I think is still a possibility. That could be a practical use that people would want on their phones. And I have this video in my hopper of ideas, and I've taken notes on it. I've actually gone back and forth with these headphones. They're Sony NDR V6s, which is the consumer version of the 7506. But they're virtually the same, and I've used these headphones for 20 plus years. So even though they might not be the best sounding headphones in the world, I generally know what I'm hearing when I'm listening to them.
Yes.
And I have done a test where I went headphone jack, dongle, headphone jack, dongle. And I swear to God, I can hear a difference. And the dongle sounds flatter and there's not as much air around the sound somehow. It's just a tiny marginal bit, but I can hear it.
It's just an extra level of compression, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Going through something else. Yeah.
I mean, the electronics that they're using inside the dongle are sort of mysterious.
Yeah.
Like nobody really. Yeah. People have x-rayed them.
A square hole.
Yeah. And also the dongle freezes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I wouldn't know. I guess I've never used my dongle ever.
Yeah, well, it's
wireless everything.
I've had the same problem with like Beats, the Beats Pro 3 or whatever they are, the smaller ones, the on-ear ones. It's Iowa. It's in California. This would not be a problem for you necessarily, but out here in Iowa, when the weather gets down about negative 20 degrees wind chill, your batteries don't like to stay alive.
yeah, I can imagine.
And the dongle does freeze, and you have to like keep. I found this out when I got the iPhone 7. I had to hold my phone in my hand with the dongle wrapped around, so it was also in my hand to keep it warm enough to continue playing audio.
Right.
So these are the things that like ultimately to me, coming at it from a place where the 1/4 inch and 3.5 millimeter jack has always been a standard, and I'm kind of insulted by the whole like it was telephone operators and
it's been around for a long time.
Yeah, but I still think that there's a practical applicable use on devices for it. But I get your position as well. That if it's time to move forward, then we should move forward.
Yeah. Do you think like Apple's in the wrong to decide that because you of all people would realize that this is not the first time they've tried to ditch something that everyone's used to. This is a very Steve Jobs is gone, but I thought removing the jack was a very Steve Jobs thing to do. Like that was something he always would kind of push people to switch before they were ready. The more recent one before the headphone jack I could think of was removing the CD drive from MacBooks with the Air. A lot of people, I remember when that came out, were really upset about that because at least back then CDs and MacBooks, that was like how you watched movies, and now you got to pay $100 for this external super drive. So do you think Apple's like in the wrong to try to push? Like, are they too early, or is there a better time to adapt to wireless? Or is Apple, like in my boat, I think they make the right decision because what they're saying is we think that, because we made AirPods, we think that wireless technology is good enough that we can start convincing people to switch. And despite people saying these are expensive, it's cheap enough that we can get enough people to buy into it and decide that they prefer wireless better just for convenience reasons.
Well, yeah, and I think you're right, but I think that they sort of flipped the chicken and egg quota here. It's like they created a chicken that then needed an egg. And
Oh, okay.
so they took the jack away at that convenient time where they had just spent, what was it, $3 billion on Beats, and
Yeah,
their next major iPhone release just happened to not have a headphone jack anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
And look, we've created this wonderful wireless technology. So I mean, there's certainly some business forethought going into that.
For sure.
But I think that also puts them in the position to drive that movement, no matter which, how it was
intended. Yeah.
So
I think that there's definitely that side of it. I acknowledge that Apple's still trying to find ways to capitalize, and they're luckily in a boat where they can basically do whatever they want, and people, even me, are likely to buy into it. But I also think that it's also a giant financial risk to acknowledge that at the time, at least, there were really only two other smaller smartphones that were doing that. Between, I think it was the Oppo R5 and the Moto Z, who ditched the jack before Apple did.
Right.
And both of which sold flagship phones that also had the jack. So they were just kind of independent knockoffs. But with Apple, it was kind of a big risk, I would say, because they know that they might lose a ton of sales in regards to ditching the jack. So I see the point of view of they do it for the money. They do it because they just capitalize on the wireless headphone industry. But I also think that they genuinely think that is better. I think the CEOs, while they do have financial and business things to worry about and push, I do think that the people at Apple, including Steve, would have likely preferred to go cut the cord, go more minimal, and full well knowing that they were going to get hate, full well knowing that people were going to get mad that they were ditching the headphone jack. So in that way, I'd say they potentially lost money. They lost sales because people like you would have wanted that headphone jack.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I tell people to buy the iPhone 6s.
Yeah, it's a great phone.
Well, but the thing is, like, that's currently for Apple. I think the iPhone 6s and the fact that it still exists, along with the SE, both of them are great phones. The fact that they exist is part of what's happened now with this sort of glut of iPhone products available.
Right.
I think there are 8 different models of iPhones available. And so if in fact the iPhone 10 didn't meet sales goals or whatever, or if it was the cost of the screen from Samsung or whatever the reason might be, I think they diluted their market to the point where if you look at the numbers for iPhone 7, the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus were by far the biggest selling models of their year.
Right.
It's much more spread out in 2017 going into 2018 because there are so many choices. And I think that's one thing that Steve Jobs would be like, what the F are you doing?
Yeah. He wouldn't like all the different iPhones up for grabs.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, he was dogmatic in his way. And, he created the iPhone 4 and later the iPhone 5 and 5S in the image that he thought was the perfect smartphone.
Right.
The perfect size, the perfect everything. And the design is still, if talking about Apple design, you look at iMacs, you look at that iMac or current ones, or those sort of Leica inspired iPhone 4 and 5 and 5S. Those are beautifully designed pieces of tech,
for sure.
And I don't know if he would have been as psyched about the splintering. And I wonder about the audio too, because I don't know if it would have applied to the headphone jack for him. He may very well have sort of thought the way that you think about the headphone jack. But I also know that Steve Jobs was like a major music nerd.
Right.
And like you can go online and look up his stereo system from like 1982 or something. And I remember, so one of the other audiobooks that I listen to from time to time is the Walter Isaacson Steve Jobs bio.
Yeah, I have that one. Yeah.
And he talks a lot about how Jobs instead of just settling for records, which, you know, everybody talks about vinyl now as like the thing,
right?
like the ultimate experience. But Jobs was like, no, quarter-inch tape. You know, so he went out and bought a reel-to-reel quarter-inch tape machine and got like Dylan bootlegs of concerts and the best pair of headphones that he could possibly muster, and that was his music experience.
Right.
So it's really hard. It's really easy to sit as a pundit and say one thing or the other, like Jobs would have done this or not. But I don't like to get into that game as much as I don't like the fact that the headphone jack was taken away, and I don't necessarily. It might have been something that needed to happen, but maybe not yet. Is where I sit.
Okay. So, do you think they could have released? Would you say they could have released AirPods alongside a smartphone that had a headphone jack, and then seen how response was, or not do it at the same time? Or
here's what I think they should do with the iPhone.
Okay.
Because they have such a rich history of being a professional's computer system for especially creative professionals. I would love to see them release an iPhone. You know, just this is our fancy jewelry type iPhone that everybody is beautiful and everybody loves, and then the iPhone Pro that has still some of those features that creative professionals and other folks might want to have, and you could, you know, give it a high quality DAC, give it, you know, like LG with the V30, I think saw an opportunity and said, Apple's leaving the audio game wide open for people who care about music. So we could slip in there and do, but they can't market their products and they can't sell them. So, but
yeah, there's that issue. But the issue I run into is, I think Apple has a history for removing things before people think they're ready for it.
Yeah.
I think that's fairly common, is just them saying, you know, like, we're done with floppy disks, or we're done with FireWire, we're done with CDs. So I see that there's still uses for it, and I don't think Apple removes things because they feel like no one's using them. That's quite the opposite. Usually they want to remove something, they want to move on to something else so that they can, because they think they found a better way, and they're trying to persuade people to keep pushing it that way. And they may have delayed it. That, you know, I still probably would have bought AirPods even if the 7 had a headphone jack, even if the 10 had a headphone jack. I still would have done the portless challenge. But I think that in that efforts of trying to not just push themselves, but also just the industry, getting people to other companies as well to adapt. And now we're seeing, you know, Google with the Pixel also going forward with it. And like, I do think that Samsung and LG are going to get there eventually. But what kind of bothers me about it is that they're going to capitalize on the people who are mad at Apple about the removal of the jack. And then once the industry is adapted, once the Bluetooth industries have changed and gotten better, and the latency is better and the quality is better, then they'll ditch it and not have to worry about it. So basically it's a smart business scheme, because it means that you get the most positive amount of PR. So when people are mad at Apple, you get people happy with you because you keep it around. And then by the time no one cares about the jack anymore, you ditch it, no one really notices. It goes kind of unsaid, like, oh, I guess they decided to go.
Yeah, you get to be reactive and Apple's proactive, and so. But I don't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation, but I do have to look
go ahead.
At Camel Fister, just super chatted $50. Was that like an intentional thing?
He said, thanks for the videos.
Oh, well, thank you, man. That's awesome. Thanks so much for that, and I'll find some way to split it with Drew, like, so that we can.
Oh, both. That's okay.
Maybe I'll come on your podcast, and then you can he'll come and give you a $50.
Okay,
super
great. Yeah, the Camel. I'm live on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so just join me for one of those.
Exactly, but yeah, I think, you know, you're right about Apple being more proactive with taking things away that maybe people aren't quite ready for. And the list is long. I mean, you mentioned the CD drive, but also FireWire. Like Apple basically pioneered FireWire and then several years later said, meh.
Yeah, kill it.
You know? And
Right.
FireWire was such a great move forward for audio peripherals and everything else in terms of speed and reliability, et cetera, that people were like, this is fantastic. I can't think of anything that would be better than this. And then Apple is like, well, we're dropping it. So all that studio gear that you bought, $30,000 worth of stuff, like now you have to figure out a different way to plug it in.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And
which is why I kind of bring up that, the removal of the headphone jack is not nearly as severe as other removals have been. My dad always told me that, I like to bring up the floppy disk one just because it's a very old one. But the reason I bring up the floppy disk removal is because back then, when they ditched that, there wasn't some other previous example people could refer to. There wasn't something like, oh, don't worry, Apple does this all the time. That was just what the heck? And there were companies that had invested thousands of dollars into deep storage on floppy disks. So to tell all of those companies, all of their storage had to be moved over now, like that, I think that was a much bigger deal.
Or the encyclopedia companies that built their business model on this fancy new CD technology. And
oh man, no, it was that was a killer for major businesses and people who had personal computers. So headphone jack, I'd say it's a big one because everyone uses it, but I wouldn't say it's as like, Apple includes the adapter. They didn't include a floppy disk adapter back then. So like there's for the general user, which I think is probably the most common rebuttal you're used to hearing, is people saying, well, like, you're not all audio engineers, but and most people go the wireless route and don't notice anything. So and I'd probably fall into that.
When people say to me like, well, not everybody's an audio snob, it's like, that's not really what I'm talking about. Like, and I've seen people sort of tell me that and recently about the HomePod and at other times that like, I'm an audiophile, finger quotes. And I'll be the first person to say that I am not an audiophile. Because the distinction for me between audiophile and someone who really invests a lot of their effort and interest in listening to music is audiophile is about the gear, and you can cork sniff and just be all over the transistors or the bloody blah blahs of this versus that, et cetera. It all sounds great, and for me, I want something that's going to get in my way the least and allow me to have the best experience. And that's what I'm always looking for in a new set of headphones or a new set of speakers or whatever. And there are varying degrees, there are varying levels that you can, it's like, okay, so now I can spend $150 on a set of headphones. And that seems like a crazy amount of money. But then you realize that like you can also spend $1,150 on a set of headphones. And what's the point where it no longer is as like you stop gaining value in terms of your experience and you're just there for the shits and giggles of having that, and I think that's kind of where I fall in. And I think just, people who are casual music listeners or not, I'm not, it's not like I used to sit around and really analyze music. But you grow out of that after a while. Sometime in my mid to late 30s,
See, as a tech journalist, I'm running out of things. Like now that I got HomePods everywhere and I've got speaker setups that I listen to, there's less and less occasions where I need headphones anyway. So, but reviewing them is getting trickier. But for me, I could say I agree. I guess we agree in different ways because I'm always going for best experience as well. And for me, not having a cord attached to the device I'm listening to is the best thing because I can just, I can get up and move around and I'm not worried about yanking on some cord. And personally, in my experience, I never really had super nice headphones, but
you got to get this.
Yeah, I never went premium wired, but every pair of wired headphones I owned always would split or do something dumb. But I never invested a ton into them anyway. But
Yeah.
so I don't mean to say that wired headphones break, but I just have gotten so used to not having one between wireless over ears, which I have now, and noise reducing ones, and then the pods that I can just take out and I pair them to my watch. It's just I've gotten so used to that every time someone sends me a wired pair, I can't get back into it no matter how good it sounds, just because I don't like having that tangled. We have different preferred experiences, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And ultimately, like, I don't think either philosophy of what's the best user experience is wrong.
No.
I'm heavily informed by my age and the history that I have with all of the technology that came before, and that really heavily informs my opinion. But for yourself and for the younger generations that are sort of growing up with this technology, it's not going to be a question.
Right. Yeah.
They're not going to
be figure out what the comparison of that's going to be when I'm your age. I'm trying to figure out like what the next generation of kids are going to be preferring that I'm not going. My guess is VR. I don't know if you had a theory about that.
Okay.
My theory is
I do have a theory.
Okay.
Implanted bone induction headphones.
See, that's something I wouldn't do, but maybe my grandkids would be into, or my kids would be into.
Yeah, and like, but it's not just a headphone; it's also your phone, and it's also. So I love William Gibson. He's basically the creator of cyberpunk. Yeah. I love his books, and one thing that has always stuck with me is his characters would have this thing attached, like built into their head, and it's their communication device, but as well, and their music storage and their all that stuff. So I do think that's the next thing, and I will be there as soon as like the phone is no longer a phone, it's just drilled into my head. I'm ready.
Yeah. Do you watch Black Mirror by any chance?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, that's whoever's writing that show has a similar viewpoint of just like basically every piece of technology is eventually going to be surgically implanted in you someday. Right. And I have kind of unpopular opinions about that. I think that once we technically start to figure out how computers can work within our own biology, once we start to figure that out, which I still think is a little further away, but once we start figuring it out, the legal side of it's going to delay us another decade. Just the whole lawsuits that have to go through to be like, okay, we want to sell this product, but when you go to the Apple store, we're going to take a syringe and just kind of like inject it or do a surgical little implant of some sort. I just feel like
I think
the amount of laws that have to get passed for Apple to release AirPower is already like bad. So imagine trying to get implants past the FCC.
Well, I think about it this way: like, we already have things like a lot of medicine is already doing this kind of thing, cochlear implants and all that kind of stuff. I think it's a problem that can be solved, and if there's money to be made, they're going to solve it.
Oh yeah. But it'll happen. I just think it'll be a lot further away than most people think. But no, it's yeah. I'm basically implanted now. It's just
exactly. Like it's like the stone age of implants.
Right. This is see, I can take it out just easily, but in the future it'll be like leave it in there for 2 weeks and then swap the battery.
Yeah. I want to give a shout out to Krista White who donated $10 through the super chat. Thank you ever so much. Thank you for being a fan of both of our channels. I really appreciate the love, as it were.
Yes, thank you.
Does that sound creepy to like call it love?
Well, now that I think about it.
So somebody asked earlier about ports. And like, I know that you were enthusiastic about your experience with your MacBook Pro. and basically the dearth of ports.
Yeah, 5 ports left.
Yeah, but a headphone jack.
Yeah, one of them being one I'll never use, and I still haven't to this day.
Exactly. What are your feelings about moving to Thunderbolt 3 exclusively? Because this is similar to the headphone jack issue.
Yeah, it's kind of similar. I saw less support with the MacBook argument, because that was also something I got a lot of views and fans of during that time of year when those came out. But I guess part of it was the big difference we might have here is just our different upbringing. See, I didn't own a laptop until the 2016 MacBook Pro came out, and the laptop I tried out before that. I didn't own it, but I tried it out and reviewed it and then gave it back. Was the 12-inch MacBook, which was I was getting into the field of MacBooks, and I'd used my mom's laptop and other people's laptops before, and I know there was this whole upbringing between USB and HDMI and SD card slot. That was one that was, I think, the trickiest to defend, because there wasn't some great alternative to the SD card slot that everyone could move to. But for Thunderbolt 3, I think it was more of an effort to get everyone on a standard I think we should have had in the first place. I think is my issue with USB-C was what they're basically attempting to do with Thunderbolt 3 is just have the ports instead of having the HDMI port, the USB port, now to a future generation, likely one that is not any professionals yet. They're just being born or not born yet. When they're going into computers, and I think Apple is right to assume that we're not ready for portless on desktops yet. You know, there's a certain amount of videos and power that we can't do over the air. So when it comes to MacBooks and desktops, we still need direct plugins. But we're going to make a port that, first of all, is reversible. That's, I think, one of the biggest oversights of the traditional USB port was that it's symmetrical but not reversible. And I think collectively, us as a species have wasted like 10 years on. Just before we started this live stream, I was trying to get the USB port
trying to figure
the right
out
way.
The magical something that you can somehow know which side you're supposed to plug in. Yes, I totally.
That's a pro right there. Someone who can plug in a USB and just know it's the exact right orientation every time. I've gotten better at that, but I still mess up.
I remember seeing Marques Brownlee say in a video that he had a secret and he could do it infallibly.
Really?
Like, he didn't reveal his secret.
Oh, okay. Well, there's ways to memorize it, I guess, depending on what computer you're on. But
yeah, I think if you know what side the little tongue, the plastic tongue is,
right,
and then you can look at what you're plugging in and know what, like, there's always the sort of sealed side and the so you can figure it out. Yeah. You're familiar with what you're working with.
And us professionals can get that down to a science, but I think Apple, in an efforts to try to mainstream something, make it more accessible for everyone, and they're likely probably trying to push people to the future faster than most, is why they adopted USB-C, is because now when you grab your power cord, or when you grab your import cord, or you buy your external hard drive cord, it doesn't matter where it goes. You just know it goes into the computer. You hit plug in, and it doesn't matter which one it is. I personally really prefer being able to charge from either side, which is something I really missed when I've used other people's laptops. Is I grab the power cord and I'm like, where does it go? And they're like, other side. And I was like, oh, you got to move the laptop around in order to power it. So I just got used to that with regular MacBooks. And I've never been a giant supporter of MagSafe either, just because I always think like, well, why not just not have people tripping on cords, or realizing USB-C is not as locked in as some other ports are. As in, I used to do this in older videos back when I was working out of my attic. I would set up the exact premise people describe. So I'd put a MacBook on a chair and I'd stretch the power cord all the way across the room, and I'd trip on it, I'd step on it, and USB-C is not firm enough to yank the entire laptop. It's firm enough. So I tried to explain to people that, you know, MagSafe's gone, but that doesn't mean the computer's destroyed, and that USB-C works on both sides. So I understand the the classic argument of it's we have to buy new dongles, we have to buy new stuff, and for me it's been one. I had to buy one dongle, and now everything works. And that
for me, like, so this was my experience recently.
okay.
Now my work computer is a 2015 15-inch MacBook Pro. So it's the last one with all the ports on it. And I love the idea of being able to plug a computer in, use it on your desktop, grab it, and go. So I went through the process of creating a system where I got a MacBook Pro, like the $2,300 or $2,400 version.
Right.
And I brought it home, and then I started ordering all the stuff that I would need to be able to have plug and play desktop and laptop. And I realized that I spent an additional $800.
Oh,
you know, because I have all this stuff. So I bought a USB hub that had all the ports that I needed and could be stationary and that kind of thing. But I also bought a dongle that I could take with me in case I needed it and all this other stuff. And literally I saw myself go from the $2,400 investment in the MacBook itself to $3,200, at which point, like, I could have bought a much different computer.
Right.
So I decided, like, in an effort to actually, because I wanted to be able to get to the iMac Pro. You know, that was, my channel was growing. I was like, oh, hopefully, you know, but I was in a position where it was better for me to spend the money on the channel in other ways than to, like, stretch for the iMac Pro.
For sure. Yeah. I didn't know most of the year if I was going to be able to do it. Most of it involved not eating several meals, just kind of like throwing away every extra dollar I could because I really wanted it. But yeah.
But I decided to go back. The nearest Apple store to me is an hour and 45 minutes away.
Oh, same. Yeah, so, it's about the same. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to drive. I decided to drive back and exchange the MacBook Pro for the 27-inch iMac. That is the best one that you can buy off the shelf.
Nice. Yeah.
You know, like it doesn't have the i7, but it does have the RX 580. And I just thought, well, this is a computer that will do all the stuff that I need it to do. And I decided to get an iPad Pro to use as a laptop replacement. And just sort of try and teach myself to be more creative with the iPad, because the investment in the MacBook Pro was like the premium that they put on those Touch Bar MacBook Pros compared to the previous models of previous years. Like, it's like, you mean you're charging me, what is it, like $400 or $500 for this strip?
Yeah, for the bar and the Touch ID sensor.
Yeah. And so it just wasn't, it wasn't like the right investment for me. And I think that's what a lot of creative professionals kind of reacted to, was like, now you're making us buy more stuff to plug in the stuff that you made us buy because you got rid of the other stuff.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, maybe it's more of a I guess I've not been I've not been an Apple customer as long as others have. While I'm a big fan, you've had a lot more experience with it. So especially if there's a time when I adapt to USB-C, I don't know. Maybe it's a different time now though, because I can't really imagine a situation in which Apple starts ditching USB-C for something else. They might. No. I'd be kind of surprised by that. But I think the main purpose is to get everyone on a new standard. So in a way, I see that. Yeah, I see that frustration that, you know, you had to buy all these dongles and that raised up the price. But in my mind, USB-C is in an effort to end dongles, because hopefully what they're going for, I think, in a new standard is if everything had USB-C, you would never need an adapter for anything. You would have USB-C to USB-C everything. Now that's very distant from now, obviously, because we're living in a world with all kinds of different ports, all kinds of different cables. So getting to that standard would be rather tricky. But Yeah, I guess I think what they were going for was more of a up and coming users are going to go for this. Up and coming are going to adopt the new standard, and I guess I was probably the target audience for that. I was kind of what they were aiming for when they said, Thunderbolt 3 can do everything and it's reversible, it's portable. But then, of course, we have the debate on why they don't put that on phones and iPads. They stick with Lightning.
Well,
So
we know the reason why they stick with Lightning.
yeah,
The licensing dollars that they make from third-party companies that want to use Lightning technology
right.
for their accessories is like stupid, crazy money.
Right.
And it's like,
Well, they'd be shooting themselves in the foot to remove it. And I think on top of that, personally, what my fans, if you're watching, would know is that I think that they're so close to ditching ports on phones entirely that that they don't want to switch at the last second, because 30 pin connectors before Lightning lasted them, I think, 5 years, maybe 6. And then Lightning, I think we're coming up on 5 or 6. So they figured, well, we don't want to switch to USB-C if we're only going to use it for 3 years.
right.
We'll just using Lightning. That way people don't get upset about old chargers not working. So
I think you've got a point about the Thunderbolt 3 port. Since it is universal and it can do a ton of things, it is the port of the future. Like, and you can go all the way back to, you were mentioning floppy disk drives, like 3.5-inch drives or 5.25-inch drives.
Yeah, I've seen those.
So the progression from there to the Thunderbolt 3 port is the whole game. Like, ultimately, you get there, you start with something because it's the only thing that you can get to work. And then you refine that a little bit, and then you refine that a little bit, and then and then the storage goes internal, and you start to think like, how can I plug things in, and you refine those ports to the point where I think for the foreseeable future, Thunderbolt 3 is going to be the port that we use. It's just a matter of like, so for people who are working professionals who have gear that they still has a useful life in front of it, it's the frustration of the additional cost, and that's why everybody complains about the Apple tax.
I'd almost call it an annoyed future. It's just, as in it's something I think we know we're gonna get to, but it's frustrating because it means abandoning a lot of investments we've already made. And I also would like to bring up that I do think there might be advancements in that port. I just don't think the shape of the port will change. As in, with the traditional USB port, we had 2.0 and then 3.0, and it got faster and it got better, but the shape of it didn't change. So I think that we could get to a point where they start making Thunderbolt 4, Thunderbolt 5 in the next 5 to 10 years. That transfers things faster, that transfers power faster. I just think that the shape of it will stay the same. That way, all of your old USB-C cables, once we get to that point, still work.
No,
that's my assumption.
I think it'll continue to evolve. I mean, ultimately, we're working toward a future where nothing has to be plugged in, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think that's their end goal.
But
so I think ditching the headphone jack is kind of in an efforts to do that, because when I talked about this with MKBHD, he kind of brought up the idea that as a consumer, I'm upset when phones don't have a headphone jack, but from a business perspective, I get it, and I know why they're doing it. It makes sense. So I guess I don't really favor one side or the other. I'm kind of more of in fact, if anything, I'd probably lean more towards business side of like, well, we got to adapt to this at some point. We might as well do it now so that we're not left in the dust later on. I've just found in my life, like growing up, whenever we would get a new iPod or something and we had to sync it with the Mac, it would say your iTunes is not up to date and you have to restart the computer.
Yes.
We had sucky internet back then, so updating the computer was like an all-day project. So I think from a young age, I've always just kind of learned to always try to be on the most up-to-date thing, try to update the software, and now, of course, with the hardware, just trying to adapt to things before they're gone. That's why I've kind of challenged so many of my fans to do the portless challenge with their phones, which is just charge it wirelessly, use wireless headphones, and that way, when Apple inevitably ditches all ports, it won't be that difficult. You'll be used to it at that point.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. I mean, yes, we have come a long way to get to this point where we can see sort of a more seamless future where everything kind of works that way.
Yeah.
But I guess we should talk about the most recent Apple product.
Yeah, lots of people ask about that.
Yeah, so I don't know. You start. Tell me what your thoughts on the home. I know what your thoughts on the HomePod are vis-a-vis your video, but
yeah,
let's talk about it a little bit.
Well, in terms of Apple sheep excitement levels of given I unbox and review everything up to Apple Watch to iMac Pro, HomePods have been kind of a mild excitement, I'd say, just because first of all, it's something they've never released before. This is not a sequel product, which most of their stuff is. Most of what Apple releases is upgrades, enhancements to the previous generation. This, unless you count iPod Hi-Fi, which everyone's going to bring up, I'm sure. This is basically a kind of a first generation. You know, they don't really call it a smart speaker, but it's labeled as one. I'm half and half on the connectivity of the HomePod. Sound is amazing. I love the way they sound. Like I said, I'm not really fine-tuned to pick up which speakers are better than others, but I have a Home Max. I'm trying to sell it. It's back at my apartment. But I also had Bluetooth speakers before that. I've had Bose speakers before that. I've heard lots of different stereo setups and just regular dedicated smart speakers and stuff like that, and blown away by sound. But of course, Apple was like, well, making a product that just sounds good isn't interesting enough. We need to give the press something to debate on. So let's just make it only available to Apple Music. No headphone jack, no ways of connecting it via a port. It's all wireless, all Bluetooth, except you can't pair via Bluetooth. So that definitely gave us all something to debate about. And what's interesting is they're kind of sitting back and watching all of this go down, because they're like, well, if sales aren't good, we'll update the software, and if sales are good, we'll just rake in Apple Music. So it's kind of interesting how they handled that. But I every day kind of wish there was more of a Bluetooth pairing option so that I could use the HomePods more with my Mac a little bit better. I can use them through iTunes, and if I'm watching videos, they work fine. But if it comes to editing, or if it comes to doing something that's like live feedback, like this conversation, the computer can't anticipate what you're going to do, then it doesn't really work. It's too laggy. AirPlay doesn't work that way. And Apple released it before stereo was available. I was kind of bummed about that, and then I got them, and I don't know how many you got. How many did you get?
I only got one.
Okay. So that makes sense, because stereo's not available yet. And I was planning on getting one and maybe getting another one when stereo came out, but then I realized I didn't want the Max anymore, and then a fan stepped in and said I should get 3. So that's the reason I went all in with the HomePods.
I need these fans. Bring these fans to
over. Okay, yeah, that's why I'm tweeting everyone out. It's like you can let everyone know about Painfully Honest. But I think it's a controversial release, but it's kind of annoying to say so much of this product depends on the future. So much of what we think of it is like, well, we'll see how it is later. We'll see what AirPlay 2 is like. They might add Spotify. They might add Bluetooth. There's so much unknown. And I personally think I think one HomePod is plenty loud for me personally, and not having stereo mode is not a major setback, because now that I've experimented through iTunes, you can AirPlay out to multiple HomePods now.
Right.
It's not stereo, but it's you get a piece of what playing 2 of them at the same time is like, and it's like that's just so over the top and so crazy. Like, what's amazing is how crisp it is, but I don't think it's a $350 add-on to an already $350 speaker worth it. So yeah, it's kind of if I were to give it a grade, I'd say I'd give it like a B or a B- or something like that, just for kind of being little bit awkward, and if they would have just, I think they would have had a lot better PR if they would have just enabled everything that everyone's already been saying about it. But I think Apple likes having kind of mixed PR anyway, and it gives us something to talk about.
Well, yeah, and that's ultimately, I mean, I definitely kind of sometimes I like to poke the bear.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. I did the same thing.
Just to incite a conversation. So like when I released the video 2 weeks before the HomePod came out, and it basically was the HomePod as a joke with a thumbnail that said "This sucks."
Right.
It was me trying to say, like, okay, take away the fact that it's like, okay, it's gonna sound good. We can give it that. Look at what they're selling us. Yeah. They're already 5+ years behind the game. So wait a few more months to get us those features, and then we don't have to get all pissed off about it. And that's right. That's ultimately like my greatest frustration. Or give people the opportunity to be beta testers of stuff. That's what Sonos does, is they allow you to join a beta program and try out new features before they go out to everybody. Sonos has its own set of like quirks that you have to get used to, but it's a much better, more robust system overall than what the HomePod is at this moment. I think the HomePod is a really interesting idea. And, when I first reviewed it after 24 hours, I really was kind of like, it sounds good, but there's this weird like separation between the bass and the mid and treble. And I don't know if it was it shouldn't have been the environment that I was listening into, because it was it's supposed to fix that.
Right. Right. Yeah, that doesn't matter.
But I did, over the course of the next week, continue to listen to it. And, there's this debate in the audio world about whether or not headphones and speakers, quote unquote, break in. And okay. Like all the parts get warmed up and moving and get and I don't know if that's what actually happened. Usually it's a combination of those two things. That the speakers are sort of like shaking themselves out, and your ears are adjusting to what you're hearing from those speakers. But there was a point, and I said this in my third video, that like, if I were to only judge the HomePod based on its audio quality, it's really impressive. And that wasn't the experience that I had when I first listened to it. Like I basically had it in my bedroom, sitting in the middle of the room on a bookshelf, and like on the top of a short bookshelf. And then I had two speakers mounted to the walls that I listened to via Bluetooth. I have an Echo that I attach to a small amplifier that I then use to Bluetooth things to the speakers. But I had the experience of like laying in bed listening to music, and if I did not know that the HomePod was playing and I walked in the room and saw the two stereo speakers, I would have thought without a doubt that those stereo speakers were playing the music.
Oh, really? Okay.
And that to me, like, okay, so, and I went on my third video and I said that, and only a few people seemed to hear it. But ultimately for me, I still returned it. And the reason I returned it was, yes, it might get the functionality that I would prefer to have, some, in the near future, or, several months from now or whatever. But again, it's sort of like the MacBook Pro, the investment that I would have to make in order to have the kind of experience I want from that kind of product would be like super expensive.
Right. No, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and I think part of it was this is kind of a new side of Apple we're seeing in a way. It's not new and it is new at the same time because this making something that's very exclusive to their ecosystem is very common now. I would say it's almost the HomePod is almost the speaker of Apple Watches, as in they made this wearable. They're very proud of this wearable. They like it. They're proud of it. And they're going to pair it only with iPhones to keep you into that, just give you one more reason to stick with your iPhone. And I think now, instead of iPhone, well, it still counts with iPhone. The HomePod is more of in an efforts to move people to their services, because as we know, as tech companies are moving into the 21st century, they have to orient themselves as services companies as hardware becomes less and less different. That gap between Galaxy, Pixel, and iPhone is going to get smaller and smaller over the next decade, between how good can a camera get, how waterproof can it get, how good can the batteries be. When all those start lining up, whoever has the services in the right place is going to win.
I think you're right about that, because I've thought for a while that we've reached peak phone, like
pretty close.
You know,
in all actuality, all phones, all flagships are pretty much, for most people, doing all the same stuff. They do a little bit better than others, but
I have the Honor 7X in to look at. That's a $200 phone that I swear to God, 3 times yesterday I had it sitting on the table beside my iPhone, and I picked it up instead of the iPhone. And it wasn't until I tried to hit the button that I realized that it wasn't the iPhone. I mean, it's a solidly built, it's a solidly built phone. And what they can do for $200 is kind of amazing. So I just think that you're right that Apple's looking forward to, I've said for a long time that I think Apple has gone from being, well, they changed the name. It used to be Apple Computers, and now it's Apple.
It's Apple, yeah.
And they've moved toward becoming a lifestyle brand. And so they're accessorizing themselves with these high quality peripherals that will then permeate the life of their users. And the iPhone will be the central hub of all that, and it'll just have the branches that go out. So all of your entertainment, all of your music listening, all that kind of stuff is all just seamlessly kind of built into it. But they and maybe it is to get the buzz going. They definitely do it in such a way that it's like, yeah, this is going to piss people off. And
that's kind of what they want. Yeah.
It's the same thing as, like, I know when I make a video that has a thumbnail that says this HomePod picture sucks, I know it's like I'm poking the bear. I know that I'm trying to incite some conversation and passion amongst my viewership. And it's not that I don't believe what I'm saying in the video so much as, like, I don't want to be the guy who's like, oh yeah, it'll probably be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about that, I think, before we went live, that the multi-million subscriber channels are basically like, well, this does this okay and this not okay. What do you think? Bye. And that's about it. But yeah, I think it's kind of smart for Apple. You can argue whether it's right, but it's smart to orient their company around, well, if we make a speaker that people really find impressive, and we're very proud of this speaker, it sounds great, now it's one more reason to switch away from Spotify. It's one more reason to be like, well, Apple Music, Spotify kind of do the same thing, maybe because I'll have a HomePod soon. And I think that the HomePod's a better sounding speaker than these speakers that work with Spotify. I'm going to switch over. And then they've got more people part of their service, which was, in my mind, pretty smart. And on top of that, it means that what am I trying to say? They're making you jealous. It's a very intentional move, and on top of that, they can change their mind halfway through the release, which I thought was smart, because they put all the Bluetooth, they put all the speaker, the stuff they couldn't change that down the road into the HomePod. That way, if no one buys this, if everyone returns it, and no one's satisfied with the connectivity, then they can pull a 180 at the last minute and say, okay, it pairs via Bluetooth, syncs with Spotify. Now come get it.
It's and I don't, usually they sort of paint themselves into that corner with a surety. It's like, we are going to go into this corner, and then we are going to paint with fire.
Yeah.
And we're just going to live with the consequences. But I think that, Apple Music is okay. I have this thing about streaming services. It's very personal, and I tend to believe that they are not the way that you're intended to consume music.
Sure.
But that horse has left the barn. I'm
sorry.
But I can sit in my basement here with my vinyl records and just think about what it was back in the good old days.
Now we don't own anything.
Yeah, but
we own the right to listen to this music, but we don't own the music.
Yeah, it's like my daughter likes Spotify because all of her friends use Spotify. And that's one thing. You can use Spotify for free in a very limited way. Is that not possible with Apple Music? But Apple Music is my favorite streaming service. And there is a very specific reason for that. And it goes all the way back like 10 years to a streaming service called MOG, M-O-G. And that was, Spotify was a thing, Napster was a thing. There were a lot of streaming services vying for the primacy in those early days. And the thing that I liked about MOG was Spotify was more playlist and single song oriented. MOG sort of put albums up in front and encouraged you to listen to your music that way, which is the way that I've always listened to music and the value that I find in it. So I loved MOG. And then Beats bought MOG. And and they turned it into Beats Music. Whatever they call it. And then Apple bought Beats. And there was a while there where I was like, okay, the headphones are obviously very successful for that company, but Apple wants to have a streaming service. And for my money, MOG is the best streaming service. So they are getting this property, and it's like not even something that anybody's talking about. But if they don't like totally destroy it and turn it into something else, it has the potential to be really good. And and that's been my experience. I mean, I subscribe to Apple Music for myself, and we have a Spotify account for the family. But I listen mostly to the Apple Music account because I don't know. It's
kind of hard to get people to switch out of it once they're in it. Because just that process of finding all your music on the other service and starting over is kind of frustrating. That's kind of the trick with, I think the reason Apple is okay with a 3 months free trial, which is a long trial period, as well as making an Android app. It's the only kind of thing that can get Apple to put stuff on Android is when they're like, well, we can get people in for 3 months, and then it's like, well, give us $10 or all 3 months of the music you've been listening to are going to be gone. So you kind of rope them in that way.
Yeah, it's basically the law of the corner.
Right.
First one's free, but you're going to be coming back for more.
Right.
Once you get a taste.
It works. Yeah. No, I tried Spotify. Nothing really against Spotify. I was just kind of like, I have all this on Apple Music already, and it syncs with my iTunes library, which I already had. So it was, and I can stream Apple Music on the watch, and part of that ecosystem, of course. So yeah, there was no chance of me switching. Depending on, if Spotify had this album, would you switch? It couldn't convince me.
Yeah, I mean, once the idea of exclusives went by the wayside, once the idea of owning MP3s instead of just renting them went by the wayside, then companies had to find a different kind of leverage to to
Right.
bring customers in. And I think Apple's done that successfully. I think people thought that Apple Music was going to be a hot mess and that a company that large couldn't possibly manage something that needs the kind of attention that a music streaming service needs to be curated and to have the infrastructure to do that. But they've done it, and it might just be that, you know, they bought Beats, who had bought Moog, and there was an infrastructure there, and they amplified it. And sort of, I wish there was a dark mode. I want freaking dark mode.
No, I'm with you there. That'd be cool. I've seen the jailbreak tweaks, and I was like, man, that makes me consider it. But yeah,
that's one thing that I thought
they got plenty of room.
Yeah, one thing I thought about the HomePod was the way that it integrated with Apple Music was very, very easy.
Yes.
And one thing that's really hard, like I can't imagine like bringing a Bluetooth speaker into my mom's house. And being like, okay, Mom, in order to get this hooked up, you have to go into your settings, you have to tap Bluetooth, you have to find the thing that you're trying to get, you have to tap that. Sometimes it won't work. So you have to try 3 or 4 times, and then it'll make sound.
Yeah. Right. No,
you know?
No chance.
So it's and that's sort of the problem I have with Bluetooth headphones as well, is that other than the AirPods.
Right.
Most Bluetooth headphones are, you know, there's just so much that can like interfere with them connecting correctly or whatever, and it's like,
yeah, I'm not a fan of anything not AirPods, really.
Yeah, and I try a lot of different Bluetooth stuff for in terms of audio. In fact, Logitech just sent me their UE Ultimate Ears Mega Blast.
Oh, cool.
Which is a newer product, I'm pretty sure. It's portable, but it has an accessory base that you can sit it on that charges a battery that then you can grab it and take, and it's IP68 and all this other stuff. Nice. I haven't listened to it yet. Just came today. But
that's cool. Yeah.
But that's like, I just, again, it's like the Bluetooth thing is still sort of ham-fisted. Whereas Apple has figured out a way to make this stuff easier, and I think that's going to help them win customers.
Yeah.
So
they've definitely mastered that art. The people over.
The W1 chip is like, I was absolutely blown away by the first Beats that had the W1 chip.
Right.
I was like, holy crap, I can walk to the 3rd floor of my house and leave my phone downstairs and it's still connected. What the hell's going on?
Yeah. Right.
And
I love that. Not just that, but also the pairing is easier. And then on top of that, checking battery life is great. You can just open real quick and the pop-up shows you what each pod is at and what the case is at. And that saves so many steps. That was just so intelligently thought out. And it's funny that Pixel tried to do the same thing. It didn't go very well.
Yeah, I didn't try the Pixel Buds.
I don't think you have to. There's been enough feedback of people just like that case is what would drive me nuts. The fact that when you're done with the headphones, you gotta like twirl them up into that coil and it's like,
I've had other wireless headphones that have that that same kind of, this is how you store it, and it's like, no, it's going in my coat pocket, dude.
Yeah, that's not happening. Right.
Yeah. But I mean, see, and this is ultimately the place where I am all the time with Apple. On one hand, super frustrated.
Yeah.
They seem to like intentionally shoot themselves in the foot for effect. But
yeah, like they know that if enough people are talking about this, it'll be free publicity. That's our advertising, is the controversy.
Oh, and then even when they start advertising, like a revolutionary new speaker that will change all speakers, and if I ever hear Johnny Ive say the word magical again, I'm absolutely going to lose my mind.
But 10 Plus is a magical phone, so it's a little bigger.
You know what else it's going to be? It's going to be the best iPhone they've ever made.
Ever. Has never made one this big before, this bright before, this colorful before. It's just everything ever again.
Yeah, that's how it is. Like, I think if I recall correctly, they have said every iPhone is the best iPhone they've ever made.
I think the two exceptions are the SE and the 5C.
Yeah,
which makes sense because they're not. It wouldn't be like, this is our 8th best iPhone we've ever made.
Yeah, it's like this is
not the best.
This is us just saying we have extra parts.
The most recycled iPhone we've ever made.
Yeah. It's in that way it's eco-friendly.
Yes, it's eco-friendly because we had a factory that was making 5Ss and we're gonna up the CPUs in them a little bit.
Yeah, which I honestly think there was all that talk there for a little while when the quarterly report came out that they were going to announce an upgraded SE, and I saw renderings that people were doing, and it looked like a tiny iPhone 10, and I'm like, that's not what people want. People want that design, that size screen. Hey, give me an OLED, that's fine, yeah, but
sure,
they want that because it still holds value for a lot of people. I remember talking to so many people after the iPhone 6 came out, and people were bitching. It's like, the thing doesn't fit in my pocket like it should. About the 6, not even the 6 Plus. The 6 Plus was like a serving tray.
Right. That was I remember how upset people got about that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think
and now the Plus models are more popular.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, and that's another thing. Like, Steve Jobs was so dead set against the phablet craze, and then the writing was on the wall. Those are the phones that people were buying. So Apple has to move in that direction. And I do like the plus size phones.
I do too. I'm getting a 10 Plus as soon as it's out. I love big phones. It's as big as possible.
It's going to be what, like 6.5 inches? Is that?
That's the running rumor. That, of course, could change. Yeah. We don't know for sure. But 6.5, I have the 3D print dummy of it in here, and I hold it, and I'm like, yeah, I could. It fits in my pocket, so I don't mind.
The only thing I worry about is, like, the more size, the more surface area, and the more the glass is going to be vulnerable. And so I'll be anxious to see how they deal with that, because right now, like, if you break the glass on an iPhone 10 on the back, you take it to the Apple store, they just give you a new one.
Yeah, they're kind of like, well, sorry. Yeah, I'm very gentle with all my phones, and especially the more I pay for them, the more cautious I am for them. Before I bought the 10, I was always caseless. I just didn't like the feel of case, and I've always just been very firm about how I hold my phones. But as soon as I got the 10, I was like, anytime I'm above something that's not carpet, I'm going to have a case on this thing, because I can't chance that.
Well, this
too much.
This glass thing that everybody's going with, it's like trying to hold a popsicle. You're just trying to hold the popsicle, and it just slips everywhere. And it's
that's a good analogy for it.
I had scratches on the back of my iPhone 10 within an hour because I bent down. This was my first one. I bent down, and I had it in a hoodie pocket. I bent down to get something off the floor, and it's just slipped out. And less than a foot, and it kind of skidded a little bit across the floor. And we have a hardwood floor, so there's dust particles, whatever. So I got like all these micro abrasions on there, and I was like, "Oh, you mother freaker!" So,
I know it's weird because they want to go wireless, but yeah, that definitely is a sacrifice.
Yeah, and I think that there are probably workarounds that they'll be able to find as wireless charging technology advances. Right now, it's like we just got to have a big circle on top of another big circle.
Right. That's all it takes.
So I know that technology is coming. I will say that the one cell phone technology that's coming out this year that I'm really anxious to see is that graphene battery that
Samsung is going to have.
And I haven't read a ton about it. What I basically have understand is that it's got a lot more potential than lithium ion. And man, if Samsung can make a phone that charges fast, that lasts for days with this new I don't know what the technology can do, but that'll be something to see, because that could be a game changer too.
Really impressed, more from a not even just a feature point of view. It's just we've been such a lithium based technology, species. As long as we've had batteries, it's always been lithium, and there hasn't been much sway from that. Though I think it's one of those things that everyone wants to see, and when they get it, it will be like, okay, my phone battery can last days and days and days, but you're still going to go to sleep at the end of the day, and leave the phone unused for hours and hours. So it's like I'm very excited to see that, and I want to see more investments. Like I've been hearing about even aluminum-based batteries that can charge in 1 second or something from 0 to 100 and stuff like that. But I still think it probably won't persuade anyone to get that phone over other phones that might have slightly better features. It's one of those things. It's like we should do that, but I could see it more applicable for cars.
Yeah,
especially. But
there might be a subset of people who, for work purposes or whatever, like that kind of battery life is really of value to them, but that's such a small subset that it's not really going to move the needle.
That's kind of the issue. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm anxious to see what these next phones. I think coming out with 3 phones, if that's in fact what they end up doing, is a mistake.
Yeah, I don't think there needs to be 3 personally either. I'm good with 2 premium ones. You got a small one and a big one, and I think that's enough personally. Maybe an SE at the beginning of the year, but
and the problem that I saw with their strategy for 2017, and it may have been supply side issues that made it so that it wasn't possible to do this, but usually Apple is like, they're pretty bold about steps that they take. And so I think releasing the 8 and 8 Plus and then saying, and soon we'll have this, fancier phone that costs over $1,000. I think that got people thinking, and then they started to look at the lineup that went from 8 Plus down to 6S and SE, and they were like, I can get an iPhone that doesn't cost anywhere close to $1,000.
Right.
Do I need the $1,000 phone? I've had people who have reached out to me in comments and stuff and said that they work in mobile stores, and the price was really a factor for a lot of the people who decided to go a different way, even if it was for another iPhone. So I thought that if they just released the 10 and said, this is it, new iPhone, boom, that would have been much more bold and much more Apple-like than like, oh, we're gonna hedge our bets with these 2 other things, and then we're gonna roll this thing out. And
maybe not everyone wants $1,000 phone.
Yeah. I think that the problem was, in some part, excuse me, the screen. The fact the screen costs $130 or whatever it was.
Right.
So
no, I think they could have they could have gone that route. It would have been interesting. I think part of it was they were kind of hoping, like, well, we know maybe this is kind of, it was kind of a very bold step with the 10, that's going forward with a notch and a glass back and a smaller screen, smaller form factor, larger screen, just a no home button. So many changes. I think I personally think it was someone probably in marketing who maybe didn't quite understand how the Apple Sheep army works, but was just kind of trying to explain to Apple that no, if you don't release a phone that's cheaper or that has the old features, then you're going to flop. Nothing's going to work out. In actuality, I think there's more truth to what you said than most people realize. The fact that if more people would have just saw that the 10 was the new iPhone, a lot of them may have just gone that route and been like, well, I want a new phone. I don't want the 7. But because there's so many other options to go with now, yeah, it's kind of diluted the lineup to be this giant rainbow of different different types of
Yeah.
tech, and I think they're pulling it safe. But I think every time there's an iPhone release, I always hear about, this tiered iPhone cutting back production by 75% because they're very quickly realizing, oh, yep, we were right. Demand for that iPhone is not high at all. Like I was there on opening day for the 8 and 8 Plus, and it was a wasteland. There's no one there.
Yeah.
I was first in line. We were there when the store opened, and we didn't
Yeah.
pre-order one, and we got one
I
on
drove
walk-in.
I drove to the Verizon store here in town, walked in, said, "Do you have Space Gray 256?" They said, "Yeah, we got that." There were two other people in the store, and
Yeah.
it was the easiest phone purchasing experience I ever had.
Yeah, I kind of liked it actually. I
Yeah.
kind of wish regular iPhone releases were like that. You just
Yeah.
walk in and buy one. And now you gotta camp outside at 2 a.m. and wait 8 hours to get anything.
Or you got to try and pre-order, which for you is at least a reasonable thing, being in California. But for anybody on the Midwest or the East Coast, it's like, all right, it's 2 a.m. Yeah. But anyway,
Yeah.
I think now we should begin the time of wrapping up, because we've been talking for a while, and I think this has been really cool. I mean, I feel like we've been able to deal with some of the things that folks have been asking for in the comments. In fact, the topics we discussed were based on suggestions from the comments. Thanks a lot for jumping in and doing this, man. That's
Of course, absolutely, it's fun. I like talking to people about this kind of stuff. It's great.
Yeah, this has been kind of a fun thing for me. Like, there's nobody in my life who I can talk. Like, my wife will not talk, deep into the weeds about tech. She's like,
sure.
My coworkers, nobody. So like,
I don't have a lot either. I got a couple people, but they're usually not interested anyway.
Yeah. So I really like this conversation, and the thing about channels that are sort of around the size of ours, like 100,000 and less, there seems to be a bunch of them right now, and there seems to be somewhat of a community that's building between, like, I had John Prosser from PHT Tech last week, got you this week, and we're all kind of at different places in our growth, but sort of the same general area.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. And I'm excited for that too, because I think it's kind of in my mind, I'm still looking at YouTube in its developmental phase. I don't think we've really reached what max YouTube is going to be. And I think this kind of new wave of tech YouTubers and journalism entirely is just people being more, how would you say, nonconformist. So people not just going by the same old, here's a product, here's some good things, some bad things, and really adding that opinionated twist, I think, is what more people are going to be interested in the future, which I'm really excited to see go forward. And I'm glad that other people like you and other growing tech YouTubers are doing that. And I'm excited to see where it's going.
Absolutely, man. Well, again, thank you so much for being a part of it. To everybody in the audience, particularly Camel Fister.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Dropped the huge super chat bomb. I was like, oh boy, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, no, I wasn't expecting. I didn't think that was coming through.
But thank you, and yeah, man. Hopefully, we can do this again. I'd love to come on and chat with you on some of the shows that you're doing. Whenever,
sure, yeah.
I'm open to it. And
awesome.
I think people might have been expecting like some sort of explosive fisticuffs between the two.
We can do that for a thumbnail. We can
but
get people interested.
I think the thing that I was most interested that came out of this conversation is that you and I both, in a very basic way, feel kind of the same thing about Apple. It's just we're coming at it from different entry points.
Right, exactly.
And with different experiences behind it.
Right. Yeah, that was interesting. And I didn't even think about it that way. And I'm realizing how there's probably a lot of other YouTubers and other just people that I'd likely compare in that similar way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was cool.
Well, thank you to all of you out there who, I mean, we had consistently about 80 people watching the show. So that's great. And I really appreciate it.
That was awesome.
Yeah. So thanks a lot, Drew, and to everybody else. We are now going to stop being live as soon as I say thank you for being here. My name's Jason, sometimes known as the JTL. This has been the Painfully Honest Tech podcast. Until the next time, I am out.